The Golden State Killer is one of, if not the most fascinating true crime stories of the century. Maybe even 2 centuries since it spanned from one to the other. I'm going to tell you why it's so fascinating on this episode of Charlie Crime Buster. Yep, it's what some people are calling, well, they're calling it the fastest minutes in podcasting.
In this podcast are those solely of individuals interviewed and participating in this show and do not represent those of Peacemaker Network and Charlie Crime Buster. All individuals described or mentioned in the podcast should be considered innocent until found guilty in a court of law. This podcast contains subject matter such as violence and graphic descriptions which may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Well, hello and welcome to this episode of Charlie Crime Buster. Today we're going to talk about the Golden State Killer, a rapist, burglar, killer, who committed at least 13 murders, 51 rapes, and 120 burglaries across California, all between the years of 1974 and 1986. He's responsible for at least 3 separate crime sprees throughout the state. Each of them spawned a different nickname in the press. That was before he was caught, after decades of inactivity. But first, let's say welcome to those of you who are our first listeners. We always have people who began to listen to Charlie Crime Buster for the first time on every single week. And we appreciate your taking the time to join us on the Charlie Crime Train. And, of course, to the thousands of those of you who listen every week, we are humbled and appreciative of your response to our podcasts. Hey, if you'd like to reach out with a shout-out, let me invite you to do that. You can reach me at charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. And if you'd like to support the program, well, just hop right on over there to the peacemakernetwork.com. That's right, peacemakernetwork.com. There you will see how you can become a supporter. We call it a badge supporter, B-A-D-G-E. For as little as $3 a month, you can support the podcast, but you can also do more than that. With that donation, you will be helping America's heroes, those men and women who run toward the danger instead of away from the danger. Yep, I'm talking about law enforcement, first responders, and the military. You can support that by going to peacemakernetwork.com. Hey, by the way, if you are interested in protecting other people, if you're in the Central Florida area, I want to invite you to take advantage of an opportunity to become a group of men and women who are on the front lines protecting property and persons right here in Central Florida. Charlie Crime Buster is working with a wonderful instructor by the name of JImlMAUNEY. And we are supporting his G class, and that G class will qualify you as a security officer in the state of Florida to carry a weapon in the performance of your duty. Now, Jim is an exceptional instructor. He'll not only train you to protect others, but he will give you vital training to keep you safe and bring you home to your loved ones in the course of your duty. He's used to train law enforcement and military. He's an outstanding instructor. We're very happy that he is helping to train our good men and women here in the Central Florida area. You see, it's just not one of those classes where they throw out information to you. He trains you to become among the best of the best in the industry. Now, there are many unarmed security officers in our state who might want to raise a level in protecting others. By the way, it brings the best pay. And it certainly gives you satisfaction of doing something that makes a difference in protecting others. And in this day of mass shootings, well, security is paramount to keeping people safe. You can be a part of the brave men and women who stand on the front line of protection. And if you're interested in being a part of this class, it's going to be happening Memorial Day weekend. You can email me at charliecrimebuster.com. That's charliecrimebuster.com, or better yet, we're going to leave you Jim's email address in our show notes so you can directly reach out to him. That class again will be over Memorial Day weekend, Friday, Saturday, range day on Sunday. For more information, you can reach out to Jim directly. Now, if you miss this class, don't worry. Reach out, check with us anyhow. There'll probably be the availability of other coming classes. Now, today we're going to be talking about the Golden State Killer. Before we do it, we always kick off our episode with a crazy crook story. And our crazy crook story today, well, it has to do with a burglar. Yep, a burglar. You see, there's something really unsettling, isn't it? To come back to your home to see someone's broken into it, taking stuff that belongs to you, right? In fact, well, almost to a person. When I investigated such crimes as a law enforcement officer, I would hear people say over and over again, even though they were not hurt or harmed physically, they would all say they feel violated. That's right. And sometimes even afraid that the burglar might return. Well, in this case of the crazy crook, that might be right. He may be wanting to return. You see, because this crazy crook, who was spooked in the midst of his crime when he heard something, he escaped the house very quickly, so quickly that he jumped from a window and ran. Well, he left something behind. Yep, he left something behind. And when the police were searching through the residence, they came across a cell phone that was left charging, yep, on a table. Yeah, you got it. This crazy crook decided that he would just charge up a cell phone in the middle of his crime. Then he had to make a quick escape, but yet he left his cell phone charging. Well, of course, the police scrolled through the contacts, called that person, and told him that this guy had been in an accident. They needed to identify him, and boom, they had the man's name, info, and immediately arrested him. Well, my friend, you crazy crook, next time you do a crime like that, probably best to charge your cell phone before you commit the crime, don't you think? This idiot broke into someone's home only to leave his cell phone behind. Yep, he is indeed Charlie Crimebuster's crazy crook of the week. Now back to our main focus. The Golden State Killer, well, that's the nickname that the press gave to this particular criminal. Often, as you know, these criminals get pegged with a nickname, like the BK Killer, the Son of Sam, and others. However, this criminal actually gathered a couple of names before authorities realized he was one of the same of other crimes. And his first name, well, it was the Ransacker. Yep, the Ransacker. He was called that because he would break into homes, ransack them often, taking such things as jewelry, ID cards, other things which would vary from place to place, as though he would come upon something and think, well, hey man, I like that. Let me take that as a souvenir of my time in this person's house, unlawfully there, of course. Well, the first recorded ransacking occurred on March 19, 1974. That's when a sum of $50 in coins was stolen from a piggy bank. And most of the ransackers' activities involved breaking into houses, rifling through, vandalizing the owner's possession, scattering women's underclothes, stealing a range of low-value items, while often ignoring banknotes and higher-valued items in plain sight. Now, the ransacker would also arrange or display items in the house. He would differently arrange them. Items included piggy banks, coin jars, and other stolen items, including blue-chip stamps, historic coins, even personal items such as single earrings, cufflinks, rings, medallions. But also now, he did take 6 weapons, various types of ammunition. And multiple same-day ransackings even took place, including 12 separate ones on November the 30th, 1974. And as they studied this ransacker, they found that there was an MO. There was a method of his operation. It included climbing fences, moving through established routes, like parks, walkways, ditches, trails, attempting to pry open multiple points of entry, windows, leaving multiple points of escape open, especially the windows, well as the house, garage, and garden doors. It included moving removed window screens onto beds, onto bedrooms, placing warning items, such as dishes, bottles against the door, and on the door handles, to give him warning if somebody was coming. And most often, all the time, he would wear gloves, at least given the absence of fingerprint evidence, that was very, very evident. Now, the sad part of the Golden State Killer story is that during this time that he was ransacking, well, unfortunately, he was able to learn things that kept him ahead of his capture. In other words, his work as a ransacker prepared him to become a much more violent criminal. And so next, our ransacker, the Golden State Killer, well, actually known as the ransacker this time, he turns from a thief into a shooter in the progression of his crimes. That's right, thief to shooter. It was on September 11th, 1975. Then this ransacker broke into the home of Claude Snelling. Snelling, 45 years of age, at 532 Whitney Lane Street. Now, interesting, Snelling, who was a journalism professor at a local college, well, he had previously even chased a prowler that he discovered under his daughter's window. That was back actually on February the 5th, 1975. Now it's September the 11th, several months later. And on September the 11th, he was awakened at 2 a.m. by strange noises. While leaving his bedroom, he ran through the open back door. There, he confronted the ransacker. The ransacker had a ski mask on. He was at the carport, and he was attempting to kidnap Snelling's daughter. She had been subdued with threats of being stabbed or shot. So as Snelling came upon him, of course, the ransacker, well, he turned around, shot him twice, and Snelling staggered back into the house to his wife, later died. Now, after the shooting, well, the ransacker, he left the scene, left behind a stolen bicycle. And after the murder, little Beth Snelling, well, she was 16 years of age, she underwent a hypnosis in order to gain further information. And the police, they also wrap up their resources. Now they're offering a reward up to $25,000 of information to catch this crook. And now that he's gotten more serious, instead of just breaking into homes and taking things, he actually shot someone, killed him. Well, now the cops get much more serious about catching, so far, this uncatchable burglar who's now turned killer. So what all did they do? Well, they set up nighttime stakeouts. That's right. They'd have stakeouts set up near houses that he had previously prowled. But even with all that, the ransackings continued. This guy is brazen about what he's doing. It was around 8:30 p.m., December the 12th, 1975. Masked man enters the backyard of a house near where the ransacker had already been reported to frequent. And that was when Detective William McGowan, he was on stakeout, you see, inside the garage. Well, he attempted to detain the ransacker. The suspect, well, he screamed out, removed his mask, acted like he was going to surrender. McGowan fired a warning shot. However, after jumping a fence to the house there at the same residence, well, the ransacker pulled out his own revolver, pulled it out with his left hand, fired one shot near McGowan's face, shattered McGowan's flashlight. And of course, nearby officers, they rushed to aid McGowan. But the shooter, well, he was able to escape. Now, they did collect some items as evidence there. They included a flashlight, a tennis shoe that was left, tracks, and dropped loot. Mainly those blue chip stamps that I talked to you about earlier, and a sock full of coins. Well, now, so far, this ransacker who has been a burglar, he has fired a weapon, and he has killed, keeping himself from being apprehended. A way to evade the police. But now, he turns from a simple crook to a real violent criminal. And the Golden State Killer, who started out as a ransacker, now becomes a rapist. And instead of being known as the ransacker of the area, he's now known as the East Area Rapist. For you see, our killer, the Golden State Killer, had moved from Sacramento area in 1976, where now his crimes escalated from burglary to rapes. You see, the crimes initially was to stalk middle-class neighborhoods at night. And then he began to search of women who were alone, one-story homes, usually near a school, a creek, a trail, or other open spaces that would provide a quick escape. He was seen a number of times, but always successfully fled. and even on one occasion he shot and seriously injured a young pursuer. And most of the victims, they had seen or heard a prowler on their property before the attacks. Many had even experienced break-ins before the attacks. Now police, they realized that this guy was pretty serious about what he was doing. They believed he would even take time to recon the area, that he would have a targeted neighborhood, that he was looking into windows, prowling in yards, even before he selected a home to attack. It is even believed that sometimes he entered the homes of future victims. There he would unlock windows, unload guns, even plant ligatures that he could later use to tie up people. And he was so brazen that he frequently telephoned future victims, even sometimes months in advance, just to learn their daily routines. Now, although our killer originally targeted women to rape alone in their homes, with their children or not, he eventually then preferred to attack couples. And the change in his M.O., the thing that changed this, interesting enough, is believed to be a direct result of the media reports. The media would report that he only attacked women alone in the home. They had a mass meeting one time, and one man stood up and said, "This guy's a coward. The only people he attacks is women alone in the home." And his usual method was to break through a window or sliding glass door, and he would wake up the sleeping person. But now he's waking up occupants. I guess it kind of slapping the face to him that he was a coward. He said, "I'll show you." So now he starts breaking into homes where the husband and wife both were there. He would break through a window or a glass door, and he would wake them up with a flashlight in their eyes, threatening them with a handgun. Then he would tie up the victims. Oftentimes he'd even use shoelaces that he bought or he found. He would then blindfold and gag them with towels that he'd ripped into strips. He had ripped them into strips, rather. Now the female victim, well, she was usually forced to tie up her male companion. Then she was bound. And the bindings, they said, were so often so tight, the victim's hands were numb for hours after being even untied. He would then, after he tied them up, he would separate the couple. He'd take dishes, he'd stack them on the male's back, threatened to kill everybody in the house if he heard one of them rattle. And then, unfortunately, he would move the female into the living room, rape her often, again and again and again. Now, a decade later, the police reported that the Golden State Killer actually called out one time during his 1978 rape, the 37th attack. He repeatedly said, "I hate you, Bonnie. I hate you, Bonnie." Sometimes the attacker would spend hours in the homes. Again, even as he was raping people and tying them up, then he would walk around, ransack the closet, the drawers. He'd eat food in the kitchen. He'd drink beer. Then he'd rape the female again, make additional threats. There were even times that the victims thought that he had left the house. Then he would jump from the darkness, and there he was still there. And again, he typically stole items, often personal items of little value, but souvenirs, occasionally cash, and often firearms. Then he would creep away, leaving those victims uncertain whether he had left. My, what fear he must have brought. Now, most people believe that he escaped on foot through a series of yards, then used a bicycle to go to a home or to a car. He made extensive use of parks, again, schoolyards, creek beds, other open spaces. Yep, no doubt in my mind, he reconned it ahead of time. He planned it out very clearly. Sometimes they said they even found diagrams drawn of the house. So he must have had that before he even broke in. And the East Area Rapist, he operated in Sacramento County. That was the first attacks in June 1976 all the way up to May of 1977. Then there was a 3-month gap. Nothing happened. Then he struck one more time before he returned to Sacramento for all of the next 10 attacks. Then the rapist, well, he attacked 5 more times during the summer of 1978. And then he disappeared again for 3 more months. Attacks then moved up to Contra Costa County, there in California in October, lasted to 1979. Now, shortly after a rape that was committed on July the 5th, well, our Golden State Killer, he then moved to Southern California. Yep, now he's going to Southern California. So he's been all over the state. No wonder we call him the Golden State Killer. And now this guy who started out as a ransacker, a burglar, the only time he shot and killed someone was when he thought he was being caught. Then he would turn into the violent crime of rape. And he'd tie people up and he would torture them with his threats, what fear he would bring. Now he escalates and he begins to just kill his victims. He first struck in Santa Barbara County back in October. Those attacks lasted to 1981, with a lone 1986 attack. The couple in the first attack, well, they survived, thank God. The alerted neighbors forced the intruder to flee, but the other victims, well, they were murdered by gunshot or bludgeoning them to death. Now, since our killer was not linked to these other crimes for decades, you see, they did not know that this was one man doing these same things. He was also known as the Night Stalker. So here we have another name now. The Night Stalker, the East Area Rapist, the Ransacker. And so the police thought they were after three different men, the Ransacker, the East Area Rapist, and the Night Stalker. Now that, to me, is why this case is so fascinating. They thought they were after three different people, but it was really one man. One man who eventually got the name of the Golden State Killer. Now, there's another reason why this case is so fascinating in my mind. It's how we got him caught. That's right, we caught him. After decades, by the way. Now, at the beginning of these cases, there were several theories as to who he was and what he did. There were those at first who thought maybe he was probably in the military. They thought that because a lot of the crimes were committed around a military base. There were even people who thought that maybe he was a cop because of how successful he was in evading the police. So he must have known how they operated. There were all sorts of theories about him. A good number of people, most people, thought he would never, ever get caught. And it took them 40 years to catch him. So how was it that he got caught? And this is another fascinating part of this story. By the way, go back to our earlier podcast, because we had a podcast before he was even caught. And we predicted how he would be caught. See how on target we were. Go to charliecrimebuster.com. Go to the search area to episodes. Find the one that says the Golden State Killer. This one's called the Golden State Killer, Another Look at Him. But the first one was just the Golden State Killer. And you'll learn all about how we predicted he would get caught. Now, even though the authorities, they were finally able to link the Golden State Killer to being the same person as the Ransacker, the same person as the rapist, the same person as the Night Stalker. Even though they were able to finally connect them all to that one person doing those things, those crimes, they were still a long way from solving the crime. It had been years later. He had gone quiet. Nothing had happened for decades. Certainly, the Golden State Killer thought he had gotten away with such a horrible, violent crime spree. It was years after it had passed, and there was no activity. But finally, he was arrested. Arrested as a result of being creative with newly recognized DNA. It was a dramatic arrest. It was in 2018. Yep, 2018. 74-year-old Joseph James D'Angelo Jr., who, by the way, was both in the military and a former cop who was thrown off force because he was caught shoplifting. Well, his arrest was all the more astounding because of how the detectives told us they caught the elusive Golden State Killer. Yep, they did it by harnessing genetic technology already in use by millions of consumers. That's right, in use by millions to trace their family trees. You see, the DNA matching effort that caught one of America's most notorious serial killers, well, it was much more extensive than previously disclosed. and it involved covert searches of private DNA, housed by 2 for-profit companies, and it was found despite privacy policies. That's according to interviews and court-discovered records that was assessed by the Times. Now, all this has brought about a very heightened debate, a debate about genetic privacy and the self-policing models of these testing companies, as well as law enforcement access to them. Now, the original version of events, well, it admitted something. It admitted not only the involvement of a private database, but it also omitted the access to this sensitive information. You see, the companies had told users law enforcement could see only if required or presented with a lawful request. One prosecutor described the public misunderstanding of D'Angelo's arrest, well, as a quote-unquote false impression. That was according to a letter a prosecutor wrote to the FBI. Investigators and prosecutors, they said that the investigation relied on genetic information that people had voluntarily made public, though with little reason to suspect that doing that would incriminate members of their own families in crimes. But the actual investigation was broader, much more invasive, and conducted without a warrant, and appeared to violate privacy policy of at least one of the DNA companies. Now, when D'Angelo was first arrested, prosecutors would only say they had used family tree searches to find relatives of the killer, and from there they identified D'Angelo. But not too long later, a detective, well, he confirmed that the investigative team had actually uploaded semen from a rape kit, and they developed a fresh DNA profile. That was then uploaded to GED Match, that being an open-source platform frequently used by members of the public to trace their heritage. Now, what prosecutors did not disclose was that genetic material from the rape kit, well, it was first sent to Family Tree DNA, and Family Tree DNA created a DNA profile, and that allowed law enforcement to set up a fake account to search for matching customers. And when that produced distant leads, well, there was a civilian volunteer working with investigators, uploaded the forensic profile to MyHeritage. And it was the MyHeritage search that identified the close relative that helped break the case. However, both of these companies, well, they denied involvement at the time. But in late 2019, well, Family Tree's DNA chief executive, he did acknowledge, he said, yep, he acknowledged it, that they gave FBI access in 2017 without realizing that the case was being investigated. He said he didn't believe it violated the company's terms of service, but he did warn that it may be required to release personal information in response to a lawful request by public authorities. Those terms later changed to alert the customers that law enforcement does indeed have access to the database. Now, much before this, DNA had been used to help defend people who may have been convicted of crimes they did not commit. Now, in all fairness, the percentage of that is very, very small, although I do agree one person being unfairly convicted is one too many. But most of the time, the courts and the juries get it right. But now, DNA is turned around, being used to close cold cases. So there you have it. Absolutely fascinating that a serial killer on the run, not for 4 months, not for 4 years, but for 4 decades, nearly 40 years, to catch this horrific, violent man. Now keep in mind, during that time, he lived among us. He went to the same places that many in the public went to. He brought groceries side by side, innocent people. And yes, there are even today, there are serial killers that walk among us. That is why, my friend, I tell you here at Charlie Crime Buster, on every single episode as we close it out, as you heard, the fascinating case of the Golden State Killer, that I remind you at the end of every single episode. Be safe. Be alert. Yep. For the life you save, it may be your very own.